new professional and graduate students knowledge community masterclass series. Today we have Supervision 101 with Alyssa Anzalone. She is the Transfer Admissions Advisor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alyssa.
Hi folks, it's really great to be here today. I will give you a heads up. This is my first time actually participating in a webinar in this regard. So if any issues happen, please feel free to use the group chat box and let me know. Otherwise, of course, if questions pop up along the way, feel free to send those that way as well. So before I jump into giving my background as to why I am really excited about this topic, I just want to start out by saying by no means am I an expert on supervision. The reason that I decided to go with this topic is just because it is something I'm very passionate about due to my own experience with a supervisor when I was a student employee, but how much I very much enjoy working with students in a supervision perspective now. So I call it my recipe for passion. And to give you a little bit of background, I did my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, graduating in 2010, getting my bachelor's in journalism and communication arts. But as much as I enjoyed my classroom experience, I think the most beneficial experience I had was as a student employee. I'm sure many of you had awesome experiences as well, and that is what led to you choosing to pursue this career field. The same happened for me, even though it took me a few years in between to finally make the jump back. As a student employee, I worked at one of the residence hall's front desks. First, just as a student employee to, I'll be honest, get some money, and I heard it was a really flexible job. So win-win, especially when you're a student and looking to balance all those new experiences. But I soon found out how amazing of a leadership opportunity it was, and after my first semester, I applied to be a supervisor. That's one thing I will say about this field is the opportunity to give students such great supervision experiences, even while they're still in their undergrad, is something that I think is very unique to higher ed. So I myself really enjoyed being able to supervise my peers, even though it presented many challenges of having to balance friendships versus being in a supervision position. I think it was really great to have that early on so that I can now know how to balance that today. I will also say it was extremely impactful because I had great supervisors, both student supervisors as well as the professional staff. And that's where I really developed my first real mentor relationship. It's no surprise in this field, we hear about that all the time on the importance of mentoring. And I'm very happy that early on I was able to experience it, which is kind of what positioned me where I am now, where I want to give back and hopefully serve as a mentor to someone someday. After I graduated, I did take a position with Target at a distribution center for about 9 months as a group leader. Even though I left that field shortly, you'll see I was there for 9 months. I think it was great because it was the first time I had formalized leadership training. I think that's very common at a lot of big companies that have corporate offices, that they do invest in their employees and have formalized leadership training in order to kind of have equal opportunities across the board for their supervisors. But the one thing I learned from this position was you can have as much formalized leadership training as they can throw at you, but until you figure out who you are and what works best for you, you're not going to be authentic and it's going to be transparent. So even though on paper I was doing really well, I was getting a lot of opportunities to participate in different committees and other opportunities with the leadership team, I felt like I was struggling to really connect with the folks that I was supervising. It was definitely challenging coming into the distribution center, working basically third shifts at 22 years old and supervising folks who were, I'll be honest, they were my parents' age and they had been working at the distribution center for anywhere from 5 to over 10 years. So it was really difficult for me to jump right in because I was so used to if I was bubbly, if I had that energetic approach, people were going to like me and I was going to do great. But I soon found out that that was kind of me playing a role and it wasn't being authentic. And they saw through that, and it was really challenging to gain the respect of people when they really couldn't get a true sense of who I was. So that's something that I go back to often, is that It was a very challenging 9 months, but I wouldn't trade it for the world, not only for the formalized leadership training I got, but also because it helped me figure out what kind of leader I'm not, which helps me realize where I am now. After that, I worked as a marketing specialist for a small supplement company for about 3.5 years. And this was very challenging because it was the first time that I felt I had a boss instead of a supervisor. And, I'll throw these terms around differently, but it's basically how you interpret it. So for me, a boss was someone who basically told me what they wanted me to accomplish and just kind of left it at that. There really wasn't any checking in to see how my experience was. They weren't checking in to see if there was any other kind of passion projects I wanted to go along with, nor did they really want to check in to see why I wasn't able to accomplish something. So I stuck it out for 3.5 years. And again, I really do think that we all grow as individuals based on our experiences, and the same can go with leadership. So I definitely took away some key points of what I don't want to be as a supervisor and how I don't want those that I supervise to feel. So it was extremely challenging, but it was the push that I needed to finally make the decision. You know what? I really miss when I worked in higher ed. I really missed the support. I missed the mentoring. I miss working with students. So I finally made the leap, and I went back to graduate school at UWM in the fall of 2014. And that was a really unique experience after being out of school for a while to jump back into that student role. But I really liked it and was able to get involved with UWM Student Success Center, first as an employee, as a peer mentor, and then being hired as a graduate assistant. So even though I was a bit older than most of the students that I was working with, it still gave me that experience, which I'm sure many of us experience as graduate students, where it wasn't too long ago, maybe just a year ago, where you were working alongside of these other students who you're now supervising, where you either had developed friendships or were just working with them as colleagues. So that can definitely be, I think, one of the challenges when you are a graduate student is having to make that shift pretty abruptly from being friend and coworker to being in that supervision perspective. So that's something that I'll talk about later on, but I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. Again, it's not, as you can see, I don't have years and years of this amazing supervision experience, and I've won all these national awards. But I don't think that's something that you need in order to be a strong supervisor. I think you just really need to get to the core of why you like it and what makes you who you are as a leader. So I'm currently an admission advisor at UW-Milwaukee, and I actually don't have any supervision within my role. So I interact with our students, employees, our tour guides on a daily basis, but I have no formal supervision over them. So that was a little bit tough, because for me, that was my favorite part about my graduate assistantship, was being able to supervise students. So I've really taken the past 6 months to find out, okay, this isn't a part of my formal title and my formal role, but how can I still work on these skills? Because I know eventually I do want to get back into student supervision, and I don't want to have this gap where I kind of just stopped developing as a leader. So those are kind of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So again, as I mentioned before, when I talked about my boss, and it was the first time I had a boss versus a supervisor, if you Google the words manager, supervisor, boss, you'll get tons of different responses. But for me, when I think about these two phrases, I think of a manager as someone who's showing up, telling you what to do, really just expecting you to get it done, versus a supervisor. And sure, Michael might be an extreme example of it, but at the core, a supervisor, I believe, is someone who really wants to know what makes each of their employees tick, and really wants to help them develop to their own comfort level. I don't think that every job requires a supervisor who's going to challenge someone to go way beyond their comfort zone. Some folks are just happy where they're at, and they're just there. I'm sure a lot of the students that we work with, they're just there because they're a student. This is a flexible job. They want the money, and that's fine. But it's still finding that way of how can we support them as their supervisor. So kind of what I talked about, and again, this is just my personal interpretation of management versus supervision. But to me, management is developing that goal and delegating those tasks and making sure everything is completed in line with that end goal, monitoring that plan, and then taking that corrective action when necessary just to stick to the plan. versus supervision really is still about having that goal, but motivating others towards that mutual goal, not just telling them this is what we have to do, let's get it done, but really getting them excited and passionate about the work that you're doing. I also think it's about developing those around you, as I said, but you have to kind of find out and meet people where they're at, because some people might be okay with where they're at and they just want to improve on some administrative tasks versus others who maybe have an end goal of being where you're at. Finding out what their goals are and really helping them by promoting their strengths, not just overcoming their weaknesses. To me, that's really important. And that is something that I learned at Target, is that it's very easy to walk around and pick out things that we need to improve, because it's, as a supervisor, we want to, encourage the folks we supervise to strive for perfection. So it's easy to point out those areas of opportunity. But I think it's even more important to really promote those strengths in a way that's authentic, not just pointing out, hey, you did a really great job at something I already know you know how to do, but hey, as an example, in my role supervising peer mentors, I knew a lot of them were really uncomfortable with making phone calls. So rather than, constantly encouraging them on the emails they were sending, if I saw that they made a few extra phone calls that week, I really try to draw attention to that and tell them what a good job they were doing, because it showed them that I noticed what they were doing, but also encouraged them, okay, I know this is uncomfortable, but let's keep trying to get comfortable with it. I think another key component is valuing people more than the procedures. I think this can be tough to do, especially in times of stress when there's a lot going on, and in higher ed that happens often. You're usually balancing 5 different projects at a time and just want to get things done. But I think it's really important to take a step back and really appreciate the people that you're working with, not just the work that they're doing. Another key component to me is allowing time for feedback and inputs. Personally, I think when I think of a manager or a quote unquote boss, I think of them as being the only people that are delivering feedback, versus when you're a supervisor, you want to create that environment where folks feel like they can talk to you if there's something that they're struggling with, or if they feel there's ways that your relationship could be improved. I think that is extremely crucial. And lastly, being open to learning from those you supervise. I think that's something that I struggled with when I first worked at Target, because I thought I was, kind of playing the role that leader was supposed to be. And that meant that I was supposed to know everything. But that's not the case. When you're working with students or even colleagues who have been in this field or been in that office for longer than you, it's really important to leverage their knowledge and information and grow from that. Not only will it empower them to know that, they do have that knowledge and that you can lean on them, but it will also help you learn kind of the ins and outs of whatever office or department you're working with. So again, one thing that I think is really important, and I've emphasized this a little bit, is finding out your leadership style. And to me, it's exploring who you are not that can help you discover who you are. Again, when I was referencing Target, I found out really quickly what things I wasn't, and that's kind of helped shift who I am today. In the same way that I had a supervisor, or that boss that really stressed me out, I found out things that I didn't want to be in order to develop goals on who I wanted to be. So I think a few ways that we can do this is both through formal and informal leadership. And this is especially important if you're someone like me right now who isn't directly supervising any students. The same can go if you are in graduate school and maybe you're just starting out, you don't have an assistantship, or maybe you're not working in the field yet. But there are definitely ways that you can hone in on that leadership. I did include a quote that I really like too: a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So for me, I think definitely being a leader who does all of those things is great, but knowing that as an informal leader, it might just be one part of what you do that really resonates with someone and makes them look up to you as a leader. So in terms of formal options, that's definitely when we think of more of the traditional supervision. That's part of your title, that's part of your job description, that's part of the expectations of what you're supposed to be doing. I also think of the traditional hierarchy where, as an example, as a graduate assistant, you are a graduate student and a graduate assistant, you have the professional staff above you, and you have students that you supervise. So typically there's a chain of command. When there's an issue, you go to the one above you, not necessarily overstepping different levels of that. I think also formal evaluations, kind of going back to what I was saying, having that formal time, whether it's once a semester, once a year, where you sit down and go through the performance. Having that formal evaluation is definitely a part of being a formal supervisor, as well as disciplinary action. As much as this can be difficult, I still think it's one of the best ways to grow as a supervisor. I was fortunate enough that when I was at Target, one of my colleagues who I worked with had really done it right, and he had developed such a strong relationship with each and every employee. He knew things about their personal lives that they had shared, and he didn't forget. And I think those are the little things that really made people respect him. And he was even so respected that when it came time where we knew we had to let someone go because he just wasn't meeting expectations, was showing up tardy on a regular basis, had already gone through that formal evaluation and formal disciplinary process where now it was time to let him go, that my colleague was able to sit down with him and have just a real earnest conversation where at the end of it, the employee realized that it wasn't a good fit for him, and he actually resigned before he even needed to get fired because they were able to have that real conversation of what is the right fit. So after experiencing that, I took that into consideration when I had a student who was just not meeting expectations. And even though during our bi-weekly meetings, we kept continuously checking in, going over action plans, going over things that were going on that he was willing to share in his personal life, unfortunately, it came to the point where not only was he not meeting expectations, he wasn't meeting our GPA requirements. So I knew going into that meeting that I was going to have to let him go. But I took what Kevin did when I was at Target, and I sat down with the student, and we just had a real conversation where, we found out what was going on. Is this the best fit for him? And so by going through that, it not only gave me the experience to be able to talk about how I have been through that process of having to fire someone and go through disciplinary actions. I also was able to do it in a way where I felt authentic still, and I felt that I was still serving as a resource of support. Because when you're working with students, at the end of the day, it's always what's in their best interest, even if they're your student staff. I think another part is that formal reward and recognition. So whether that's students who meet expectation and are able to get a raise, or if you have awards that you give out every month, I think it's very important that when you are in a formal supervisor position that you do remember that. Because as I said, it's easy to point out where people aren't meeting expectations, but they will much more remember when you do recognize them and provide that positive feedback. On the flip side, when you're thinking of informal supervision, this is something that I've really been working on right now because currently there's no supervision that's part of my position or even part of my title. So I've really been working on ways that I can still serve in that role and still work on those skills. So for me, it's really about a leader is someone who's influential in some way, shape, or form. So I take this as an opportunity to work with the students around me, work with my colleagues, and work with the graduate assistants to really get to know them, but also put myself in a position where I am respected. And when you think about respect, it can come from a number of ways. It can come from you standing up for something that you don't agree with, standing up when you see something happening. As an example, if I saw someone talking negatively to one of the student staff, I would definitely step in and intervene because knowing that that's not something the student should have to experience. That's kind of one way to get respect. Another is leading by example. Maybe I'm the one who's offering to step in and sit at the front desk to give the students a break, or I'm stepping in and volunteering to answer questions even though they weren't necessarily coming to me for that, but just offering to be that source of support. I think it's really important because then at the end of the day, I might not be their supervisor, but they can see me as someone they can count on. You can also take a more formal role with this and serve as a mentor to someone. I'll be honest with you when I say I haven't had too many experiences yet where I've served as someone's formal mentor. I've had a few that I have worked with where I've had a mentor and I've taken what I've learned from that. But for those of you who maybe have a little bit more experience or like more of that formalized relationship, offering to serve as someone's mentor would be a really great way to serve as that informal leader. One thing I'll point out too is oftentimes informal leaders, they might not even acknowledge the power that others are giving them. So that might be something where you don't realize that you have so many people looking up to you, and that's okay. It's really just about being authentic and staying to who you are. I will say another informal way of doing this, especially as a graduate student, is thinking about either the other students you work around or the other graduate assistants or graduate students that you work with. You know, we all bring to the plate many different skills, many different experiences, and I think it's about being able to share those with others so that they know if they have questions or problems that they can come lean to you. But I think being a leader amongst those you work with can really help with improving those supervision skills. Another more formalized way of doing this is by looking at some of those skills and personality tests. I'm sure you've heard of many different kinds, but my personal favorite is StrengthsFinder. The reason being is I like looking at the different skills and strengths that I bring to the table rather than looking at exactly what other tests say how I will react in a situation. So as an example, for me, when I took StrengthsFinder, my strengths were empathy, developer, arranger, input, adaptability. You might be thinking, okay, that's really cool, but how does that contribute? And to me, it's really about thinking, okay, I can recognize these. I actually very much agree. How does this come to play when I'm supervising? And I would say the biggest one for me is definitely empathy. For me, that can be a strength, but it can also be an area of challenge when I'm supervising, because for me, I very much like to empathize. I like to know folks' story. But on the flip side, that might be something that's challenging when I do have to give some of that more critical feedback. I had a colleague who I worked with, another graduate assistant, and I greatly admired his ability to sit down with the students that he supervised and give them very direct feedback, because it seemed very bold to me, but it came so naturally to him, and he was able to do it in a way that was authentic and still respected. So knowing that, I look at what my strengths are, and I know that if I were to just deliver the same exact feedback that he had given, it would not be interpreted the same way or not received the same way by the student, because that's just not who I am. So for me, it's about turning these strengths into ways of working through each of my responsibilities. Kind of as an example, for developer, I really like looking at those around me, finding out what their goals are, finding out what their interests are, and helping them achieve them. So that's one way that I think about supervision, where I sit down and I find out different students, okay, so you're in this job because you like it, but you also have this interest in helping others. There was a student I worked with who was going into social work. So the way that we kind of kept him motivated and kept him interested in the job was by giving him an opportunity to present at one of our training presentations on mindfulness and self and different ways of strategies of coping. So for me, it was about finding out what his interests are, how can I keep him motivated, and what can I do to help him get there. So I'm sure many of you have other ways. I think if you have other suggestions of tests that you've taken or maybe books that you've read, that would probably be a really cool thing to share on the Facebook page so that we can all benefit from it. I know me personally, I love reading that kind of stuff. Sometimes it doesn't stick with me as much, but for some reason there was something about StrengthsFinder that really resonated with me, which is why I always find myself going back to it. This is I'm sure as graduate students, you hear this a lot on learning how to bring theory to practice. And I will say, as you go to your first interview after graduate school, it's important to always have at least one theory in your back pocket that you can pull out and talk about. And for me, that would definitely be cold and experiential learning. The reason I bring this up is I was able to work with some of my fellow students, and we came up with a really authentic way of putting theory to practice. So what we did was we looked at Kolb's theory and we tied it into Harry Potter. And instead of being accommodating, diverging, converging, assimilating, we assigned each of those to one of the Harry Potter houses and turned it into an activity that can be utilized with student staff. The way that we interpreted this was we really want to make learning and training accessible to all learning styles, and what's a way that we can work through that with student staff. So what we did was we had students take an assessment. It wasn't a formal one. It was just kind of one of those free learning styles quizzes that you can find for free online. So we had them take that and then break into groups based on what their learning style was. And then we had them talk amongst one another about whether they agreed with what they were reading, if they saw some similarities, if anything resonated with them. And then we had them each take a random item out of a bag And we took this approach as if we were working with a group of residents, with RAs. And we said, okay, based on the object you pull out of this bag, we want you to talk about how you would create a program for your floor and still be sure that it is appealing and accessible and inclusive to all of the different learning styles. So for us, it was a really fun activity to do, but also it really helped me think that no matter what I do in the future, whether it's presentations like this, whether it's doing formalized training with student staff, how can I make sure to include activities and ways that each different learning style can take away from it? So if it's making sure that, for people who aren't accommodating, they like to work with others and get things done, setting goals and testing out their approaches. So how can I set a training that's going to appeal to them? For diverging, they like working in groups, listening and receiving feedback. For assimilating, making sure that there's more of that analytic piece to it and having time to think things through. So maybe it's by taking one of those quizzes or taking one of those personality tests to go through and give them that time for reflection. Or for converging, they like to experiment with new ideas. So again, kind of see where I'm going from with this, where it's a really cool way to take theory to practice, and it's something that I can take with me now no matter what job I go with. I can definitely integrate that. Another theoretical perspective I liked was thinking of the different types of motivation and intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And for me, this was really important. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about with that student who was going to school for social work who wanted to do a presentation. Really working with the students to help them feel a purpose and a positive connection to their working environments. As I said, for everyone, that's going to be different. Some students are totally fine just showing up, meeting expectations and going home, but others really do want more from that. So those tend to be your students who maybe apply for the leadership positions within your organization. But if there's a limited number of spots, you have to think of how you're going to still provide other opportunities for all of those students. So I think especially it can be tough when you work in an office where maybe you don't have a large budget. How can we still put on ways to motivate our students and keep them involved? And so for me, the biggest one was by letting students do their own programming and participating in different trainings. So I think it's a cool way to get creative when you're thinking about maybe some struggles your office is having by tapping into your students. They're the number one resource, and they'll be really excited to not only contribute to the office, but also to have something then to put on their resume. For anyone who watches Girls, you'll recognize this little image, kind of a dramatic depiction of going beyond the comfort zone. And I think that's a really strong way to continue improving on not only your leadership, but supervision skills. I think especially as graduate students, really take advantage of this time as being a student. This is the time to develop and grow. I mean, this is the time where you can think of anything you're interested in and really take the opportunity to grow with it. So I know for me, when I was working with my graduate assistantship, I really resonated with our transfer students and was able to take the opportunity to kind of do some more digging and get involved with other transfer student initiatives that we had going on campus. And today that kind of has helped lead to where I am in my professional career. So taking advantage of that. Or maybe, as you're getting ready to graduate and you're kind of looking over your resume, look at where you feel you don't have experience and work with your supervisor, some of your mentors or fellow graduate students to think of ways that you can expand and gain that experience, whether it's through a formalized internship, by just volunteering to help with an event or program on campus. I mean, this is the time to do it. I think also taking that approach of being a lifelong learner shouldn't be difficult for us. I'm sure many of us chose this field because we are lifelong learners and because we want to continue developing. But I think if you continue as a lifelong learner, it'll help you be a lifelong leader to continue challenging yourself. I will say the biggest help for me has been observing supervisors and other leaders around me. Currently, we have an interim director in my office, and she did such a great job of coming in and putting the department #1 goal as team morale and customer service. And the way that she did this was she met individually with each of us for about an hour and asked us 17 random questions and wrote the answers down. Now, I knew that she was going to be asking us these questions, but when I saw her writing them down, I was really taken aback and thought, that's so bizarre. Why is she writing it down? But then I thought, wow, because she actually cares and she actually wants to be able to reference these things in the future. So it can be anything from what is your favorite thing to do outside of work to one question that I know I'll be using in the future, which is asking folks, how do you like to be recognized? Some people like public recognition, others like private recognition. And until she asked me that, I hadn't really thought about even the ways that I like being recognized. So that was a really great moment of reflection and something that I will definitely be using in the future when working with others. Another great question that she had asked us was, what kind of rewards do we like? And kind of going back, like I was saying, to that intrinsic motivation, is it something, do I like being rewarded with a pizza party? Do I like being rewarded with maybe being able to leave early on a Friday or taking a longer lunch? So it was kind of cool for me to be able to reflect on it. Again, I thought I had done all this reflection already and knew who I was, but by finding those leaders who are still going to find ways to challenge you, I think that's important, and I think that's something to hold on to. I know I definitely will be connecting with her even if I leave this position, because you just need to hold on to those mentorships when you find them. One thing I cannot emphasize enough, though, is not to forget about the administrative responsibilities. As much as this is your time to grow and develop as a student, as a leader, you really need to remember what it is you were hired to do. I think this also can be big because it's so exciting to get caught up in those big projects. I know, especially when working with students, if we give them the opportunity to pursue a passion project or to put a program or event together, one thing we always tell them is, but make sure you're still meeting expectations. The same goes for us. I also think, in addition to meeting your own administrative responsibilities, it's great to really know the organization you're with from the ground up. When I was with Target and had more of that formalized leadership training, that is something that they emphasize, that we're going to go around to each different job that is available in the distribution center and learn that, because it's really important to have an appreciation and a respect for the work that everyone's doing. But I also think it helps with the big picture. So kind of even as an example, when I had my graduate assistantship, knowing how the phones worked at the front desk, so that if the front desk person wanted to step out and grab lunch or even just go to the bathroom, I was able to sit there and still handle phone calls, still handle people coming in, and again, putting myself as someone they could depend on. So even though I was not in charge of overseeing the front desk, again, going back to that style of informal ways you can be an informal leader, knowing the administrative responsibilities and kind of the day-to-day to-dos of your office can really put you in a position where you can be respected. Other than that, I would just say step beyond your comfort zone. Even for me right now, doing this webinar is not something that I had done before. And you might think about it, well, how is that helping you develop as a supervisor and a leader? Well, for me, it's just about constantly putting myself beyond my comfort zone so that when I have situations come up in the future, I'm comfortable with doing that. Also learning how to lean on others and gaining their perspectives on things. So in terms of what's next, here's some practical things you can do depending on where you're at. So if you are a graduate student who is in your last year, congratulations, the end is almost near, you can do it. If you're just starting out, soak it all up, it's going to fly by. Or if you're like me and you're in one of your first positions after graduation, maybe what are some ways that you can still develop as a supervisor without having it in your title? I would say volunteers who advise a student organization. I know at UW-Milwaukee, this was something that we couldn't do as graduate students unless we had a professional staff member who also would help advise. So I think this is a really great way to still stay connected with students, still learn how to kind of navigate the ins and outs of working with a group and also serving as a leader. But it is a little bit less committal so that you can still focus on learning your new job and still staying strong in that regard. Another one that I know I've mentioned is develop a relationship with student staff, even if you don't directly supervise them. So being that resource or that mentor. But another one is connect with other graduate assistants and listen. You still have a fresh perspective. So for me, it's really important with the graduate assistants that I work with in my office now. I try to just sit there and listen because I understand the struggle. I understand the frustration and how much you're going through. So kind of just appreciating, are they coming to me for advice or are they coming to me because I can relate? And for me, most of the times it's because they know I can relate. So it's important to just sit and listen rather than just waiting and wanting to give them advice. Some other things you can do is participate in a professional organization. I think definitely tuning into webinars, taking advantage of any literature you can read is a really great first step, but then I'd also say consider joining a committee. You don't have to necessarily even take a leadership role within that committee unless you want to, but joining a committee will not only help you learn more about what's going on in the field, it'll also give you a really great time to network and develop those relationships beyond just those at your institution. And lastly, I would say express your interest in supervision to your supervisor. Maybe they're just waiting for someone to step up and take this off of their plate of whoever is supervising all the student staff. Or maybe, unfortunately, they won't be able to offer you any kind of role with supervision, but unless you express it, they're not going to know. So I think it goes back to having that great working relationship with the person who's supervising you so that they can know kind of what makes you tick and what makes you motivated. Lastly, we're going to throw it back to Legally Blonde. Stay authentic. Hold on to what makes you you, because that's what's going to make you an effective supervisor. The reason I use this picture is because I like to think of this is kind of how I felt when I was at Target in the distribution center. I might have put on the right clothes, I might have shown up and been in my role as a supervisor, but I was still kind of my bubbly self who, there was nothing wrong with that. That just wasn't the right fit. But I found the right fit now. So I think really just taking the time to reflect on the supervision experiences that you've had, the people that you've worked under, and what kind of things you respected or what kind of things you've noticed as a challenge, I think will really set you apart. So with that, does anyone have any questions? If not, one thing I will say too is, utilize that Facebook page and really connect with others. I think it'll be a really great way to share. I also would be very curious to know, for those of you who are in a similar situation with that I am, I'd love to know what you're doing in order to still connect with other students and have those informal supervision roles. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a great weekend.
Perfect. Thank you, Alyssa. That wraps up our Supervision 101, part of our online masterclass series with the new professionals and graduate students knowledge community in Region 4 East. Hope you all have a great day.